Hi guys, happy Christmas Eve. I'm afraid I have nothing particularly festive planned for today, just a plain old book haul. I don't know if anybody's interested enough in this channel to keep track or pay close attention, but you may have noticed that I effectively stopped doing book hauls sometime during the summer. While I was filming a book haul video, in fact, I was filming this huge long book haul and I suddenly just burned out in the middle of it, and I just couldn't be bothered anymore. I couldn't keep doing it for a single minute. And after that, I felt like there wasn't much sense anymore in continuing to do these haul videos. But I've been kind of missing them. So what I thought I'd do is that I'd group the books that I accumulated in the last few months, half a year maybe. I'd group them into themes and or genres and film these book haul / TBR tours videos that all feature books of a certain genre or certain theme each. And what we are going to start with today is crime fiction, murder mysteries, and legal dramas. Merry Christmas! So a couple of weeks ago, I suddenly developed an urge to read courtroom dramas. So I started studying best-of lists and recommendations lists, bestseller lists, but I somehow couldn't find very many that appealed to me and that weren't written by John Grisham. It's not like I hate John Grisham, but I've read 4 or 5 or even 6 of his books, and I feel like it's time for something new. I don't just want to read the same old stuff day in, day out. And so I did find a few, but I haven't bought them all yet. So most of the books in this haul are going to be crime fiction of different subgenres than the one that I originally set out to read, or to buy at least. But I did buy some, and one of them is The Verdict by Nick Stone. Here the protagonist is a legal clerk in London who gets the opportunity to work on the defense team in a high-profile murder case. It turns out that the accused is actually a figure from his past. It's an old friend of his with whom he had a falling out, and the two men know a secret or two about each other. And I expect that their past will somehow turn out to be linked to the present and to the murder case even. The author, Nick Stone, used to actually work as a legal clerk himself, so I assume he knows what he's writing about. That was a huge selling point for me, together with the fact that this is set in London, and most courtroom dramas that I came across are set in the US. And then I bought Primal Fear by William Diehl. Here, a Chicago lawyer ends up defending a young man who is more or less certainly guilty of the murder that he is accused of. He was caught red-handed with a murder weapon in hand on the scene of the murder of the Archbishop. So it should be a closed case. But apparently this is also a psychological thriller. I don't know. I assume that when we hear those keywords, Archbishop, young man, psychological thriller, our thoughts are going in a certain direction, aren't they? This book was published in 1992. I hope that the story still holds some surprises even in our more disillusioned present times. And then I found this treasure, quite literally. You will notice that it looks like not something that you would pay money for, and I didn't. It was a little free library find. And it was a very lucky find, because I'd actually been thinking about getting this somewhere at a used bookstore for some days before I found it. This is quite a classic by now. It was published in the 90s or even 1990 sharp. This is the first book in a series of over 20 books in the Kay Scarpetta series. Kay Scarpetta is a coroner, and a female coroner at that. Coroner / detective, I guess. And apparently when this book came out, Kay Scarpetta was quite a novelty as a female coroner. I'm not quite sure if she was a novelty just in crime fiction or in real life as well. This is an American book by an American author, and I'm not quite sure what the conditions were for women in this field back in 1990, sorry. With Postmortem, we were already leaving the field of legal dramas behind and going more in the direction of police procedurals. And my next book is a straight-up police procedural. It is The Quaker by McIlvanney. This is a historical police procedural. It's set in Glasgow in 1969, and it is based on the true case of a serial killer who murdered 3 women. And I'm not quite sure, but I think this book also takes us into Glasgow's underbelly of organized crime. Next, again, police procedural, The Likeness by Tana. This is book 2 in the Dublin Murder Squad series. For some reason, I skipped books 2 and 3 in the series and went straight from book 1 to book 4. And it doesn't even make sense, because I liked the protagonist of this book, Cassie Maddox, a whole lot in book 1. The Dublin Murder Squad books all have different protagonists, but it's always one that we have already met in an earlier book, except in book 1, of course. In this book, the murder victim is a young woman who looks just like Detective Cassie Maddox, and she even goes or went under the same name that Cassie used when she was working undercover. So now the murder squad are sending Cassie back undercover to take the place of the young woman, the murdered woman, and she has to pretend that the attempted murder was unsuccessful and the woman survived. And this way they are hoping to lure the murderer into a trap when he tries to finish the job. I have mixed experiences with the Dublin Murder Squad books, but I liked In the Woods book 1 a whole lot, and I also already like the protagonist Cassie Maddox a whole lot, so I have high hopes for this one. And Pretty Pretty Boys by Gregory Ashe is the first volume in a long romantic suspense series, the Hazard and Somerset series. But as I understand it, there is very little romance in this first installment, which is like the introduction to the series. This is set in rural Missouri or small town Missouri, if there's a difference. And it's set in the hometown of the 2 protagonists. However, one of them, Hazard, has lived in St. Louis for a while, and he only recently returned to the small town after his life in St. Louis fell apart. He's joined the local police force in his hometown and is, of course, partnered with an old enemy of his. And they have to investigate a series of murders that are somehow linked to their past, I think. I'm pretty sure that what makes this book and this book series engaging to read are the characters and their relationship, which is ultimately going to be an enemies to lovers kind of story arc. I've read one book by Gregory Ashe before, Stray Fears, which I recommended in a video not so very long ago, and I loved it, especially the characters and the character dynamics. The book was Stray Fears, and this is a horror novel from Louisiana. But the horror there was balanced with a lot of sweetness, and I've been looking forward to reading more by Gregory Ashe ever since. And then I have My Sister's Grave by Robert Dugoni. The protagonist in this police procedural has become a homicide detective in Seattle because she was never really satisfied with the investigation following her sister's murder, and she was never convinced that the person who was convicted was or is her sister's actual killer. And then 20 years later, her sister's remains are finally discovered, and the case is opened again, or she opens it in secret. In any case, it's an opportunity to shed new light on what actually happened 20 years earlier. I like that here we have a male author writing about a female homicide detective, and I'm curious to see how it's turned out. And apparently it's a series, so if it's good, there's more. So those were the police procedurals, and now I have one sleuth story, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Here, a student, a schoolgirl, takes on a 5-year-old closed murder case as her final year school project because she's unconvinced that the real killer in this case was ever actually found. And she is actually convinced that they are still out there. So this is quite similar in premise to My Sister's Grave, but very different in execution. It is made up of a mixture of formats. There are transcripts from podcasts or production logs from podcasts strewn in throughout. And usually this isn't really my thing, this mixture of genres and formats. But here it sounds like it's very organically integrated into the story. And this mixture, it seems like it lightens the tone and making the whole thing just a little bit quirky without ever over-exaggerating it. It just sounds like it makes it good fun without making it somehow obtrusively quirky, if you know what I mean. And this is also the impression that I get from the author Holly Jackson, who's a very young author. And I watched an interview that Jean from Bookish Thoughts did with her sometime in 2019, about a year ago, I think. I'll link it down below. It's a very nice interview about her publishing process. And my last category is professional private investigators, or investigators that are not employed by the state. And here we have Death Claims by Joseph Henson. This is the second book in the Dave Brandstetter series. Brandstetter is an investigator for an insurance company, and he makes sure that people who are reported dead or declared dead by the police are in fact really dead before their relatives can claim their life insurance money. I read the first book in the series Fadeout earlier this month, and I thought it was fantastic. I'm going to talk about it very soon in a recent reads kind of wrap-up. And lastly, I have Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. This is a humoristic, satirical, not to say totally wacky detective story by Douglas Adams, the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You may be familiar with the TV series adaptation with Elijah Wood. I have to say, in this format, it was a little too over the top for me. I didn't enjoy it. I watched 1 episode and a half, maybe. But I imagine that the book has a little more depth and some more layers of subtlety to it. But most of all, I just love the title of the second volume so much that I just had to get them. And the second volume is called The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. And isn't that just the best title in the book that you've ever heard? I just had to get them after I saw that title, and I just hope that they live up to expectations. My expectations, that is. So this is some of the festive holiday cheer with which I'm going to spend most of the next 10 days. If you're not working, I hope you have some good books to curl up with during the holidays as well, or that you found some in this book haul video. If not, I am in fact going to come back very shortly with a recommendation of another crime series. Until then, Merry Christmas, have a lovely holiday, if it's a holiday where you are. Bye!